Hello, thank you for coming. I appreciate everybody coming tonight. Thank you for coming. Looks like we have quite a few people here tonight, which is great. Tonight we're going to be talking about ways to manage anxiety and depression without medication. So first things first is I want to remind everybody that you can ask questions at any time. There's several icons. I don't know how it appears on your screen, but there's either a chat icon or a questions icon, and I can see the questions pop up, and we can engage with each other and talk about, if you have any questions about your particular, whatever it may be. I want this to be very interactive because part of what helps people make changes is their ability to talk things out. And if you've attended any of my other webinars, you know that one of the main things that I stress is that there's not enough of people talking things out. We keep things inside of us. It grows. It's like if you had some food poisoning and you don't let that out, it's going to continue to infect you. So we need to get in the habit of talking things out. I know we live in a society that stigmatizes discussions about mental health, discussions about depression and anxiety, but let me just guarantee everyone listening to this broadcast tonight, everybody you know has issues. Everybody you know is struggling with something. So I don't want you to think you're the only one who feels that way. But let's talk a little bit about what depression is and what depression isn't. So first off, let me explain to you guys a couple things. You hear a lot of commercials online for various antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication. What you hear in those taglines is that depression and anxiety is a medical condition, okay? Now, let's talk about that. Depression and anxiety has been made a medical condition by certain organizations that want to sell us medication for it. Now, let me just say something. I'm not saying all medication is bad by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm certainly not implying that if you're on medication, there's something wrong with you. That is not at all what I'm implying. What I am implying is that medication for these types of negative feelings we all have is something that is overly prescribed. In fact, most medications that we take were originally, or people are taking, were originally prescribed for very severe cases of psychosis, different types of severe psychiatric conditions. A lot of the medication we're taking now can easily, and I say easily, be treated by working through the thoughts and feelings. So that's point number one. You see these commercials on TV for various types of antidepressants. I'm not going to name any of them. We all see them. Please listen carefully to what they're saying. You will hear in there when they do the little analogy of what a neuron is, and you see the little dots going between each neuron. And I'm going to explain what that is in a minute. But you'll hear them in their presentation say that it is believed that, it is thought that this is how depression and anxiety is. That's the reason they do that, is because that's a disclaimer for them not saying this is actually the way depression is and anxiety works in our body, and this is the way our medication works. So let's take a popular antidepressant. I'm not going to name any by name, but let's take, it's called an SSRI. Now, what does SSRI stand for? You hear that a lot. What does SSRI stand for? SSRI stands for, and someone's chiming in with a question here, so let me just stop for a second. Can't hear. Okay, can everyone hear? I'm seeing on my screen that the mic is registering. If you cannot hear me, please make sure your volume is turned up on your computer. So, Shannon, if you can't hear me, try to change. Well, you probably can't hear me say that, but try to. Okay, great. Kyle is saying he can hear me. So let's keep going here. Shannon, I'm going to hope that you can work that out. So SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Okay, Pleasure is saying she can hear me. Great. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Now, what does that mean? It sounds all fancy, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Let's break it down. Selective serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter. It's associated with feeling good. The theory goes that the more serotonin we have, the better we're going to feel. A theory. That's a theory, okay? reuptake inhibitor. What does that mean? Reuptake inhibitor, what does that mean? Well, think about a pool. A pool gets too much water, a pump comes on, sucks the water out, levels it off. That's the same thing in our neurons. If you look at the commercials, this is the way a neuron works. It has a thin body coupled with a flat face, and they never touch each other. They basically, it's called a synaptic cleft. And in between that synaptic cleft, this neuron releases, for this sake, is serotonin. That serotonin comes into the synaptic cleft, which is right here, and gets taken up by this neuron, and then that's how we start feeling better. So the prevailing theory goes, if we can get more serotonin in the synaptic cleft, then we're going to start feeling better. The problem with that is that, once again, that is a theory. That is a theory of how depression works. And there are multiple different theories around what causes people to feel bad. Let's talk about how depression starts. Again, we're told depression is a medical condition. And let me say again, if you're on any kind of antidepressant, if you're on any anti-anxiety medication, I am not saying there's anything wrong with you. I'm not. All I'm saying is that there are alternatives to that medication, and those alternatives are some of the ones we're going to talk to tonight. And please, any questions, feel free. Don't hesitate. So, one of the main things that is hotly debated in my field, and I'm a licensed psychologist, the difference between a licensed psychologist and a licensed psychiatrist is a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. He or she went to med school and they learned how to prescribe medication. That's basically what a doctor does these days. I'm not saying all doctors are bad, but basically a doctor prescribes medication. That's what they do. That's what a psychiatrist does, okay? So they prescribe medication. I don't prescribe medication. I made a conscious choice to go to get my doctorate degree in psychology because I wanted to try to help people work on their thinking and feeling without medication. So this is the hotly debated topic in the field today. It's called the chicken or the egg. We all know that. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the chicken come first that laid the egg, or did the egg come first which caused the chicken? And people debate this all the time. Well, let me tell you how that works in psychology. The medical field, pharmaceutical companies, I'm not running them down, I'm just saying this is their stand. Chemical imbalance. That's what we hear, chemical imbalance. We have these chemical imbalances. First off, there's no way to measure that. Secondly, that's a theory, because many times what starts as a chemical imbalance actually is an environmental imbalance. Someone had a negative event in their environment. Something happened in their environment that caused them to feel an exceedingly amount of negative feelings, whether that's sexual abuse, whether that's being beaten up, whether that's being ritualistically teased, whatever it may be, which then causes the individual to feel sad, feel mad, feel bad, whatever it may be, experience negative emotion. So guess what starts to happen? Your neuron starts feeling that, and guess what it does? It restricts the serotonin because that's what it's feeling. It's this counterintuitive idea. You would think that when you feel bad, you get more serotonin, but that's not the way it works. That's why when we feel happy, we feel happier and happier because your neurons are like, oh, I want to feel happier, so they're releasing more. But that's the debate. That's the debate. Which came first, the chemical imbalance or the environmental imbalance, as I call it? And guess what I tend to fall on? The majority of people I have met and treat and work with had chemical imbalances. Have environmental imbalances that then causes their neurons to react differently, to release less serotonin. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Ways that we are affecting our neurons by what is happening in our environment. So one of the main things, as you guys know, as I've talked about in one of my previous sessions is, and again, no problem, Christy, you're welcome. Feel free to ask any questions, okay? But one of the main things that I work with is a form of therapy called cognitive behavioral psychology. Now, what that is that is the most, and by the way, I'm in one of the boardrooms at one of my offices. This is why I keep switching locations, because I have multiple offices, so I just took one of the boardrooms. Cognitive behavioral psychology, the most scientifically validated form of therapy that has ever been studied. There are plenty of studies out there that show the effectiveness of cognitive behavioral psychology. A quick Reader's Digest version. Cognitions. What's in my mind affects my behavior. If I have a whole bunch of negative cognitions in my mind, and you guys have heard me talk about me losing my hair. I started losing my hair. I started hating myself. I'm never going to find another woman, blah, blah, blah. Stephen Walker starts feeling bad about himself. That's how it works. So what somebody like me tries to help people do is look at their cognitions. How is what they're thinking and feeling affecting their behavior? And the way that works is we have to look at our beliefs. We have to look at the way we believe and how we believe and what we believe is affecting how we feel. Now, how that works is when you talk to somebody like me, or even a lot of people can do this on their own, depending on the depth of their emotional wound. And I talked a little bit before about emotional wound. But one of the main things that people need to start questioning is their belief, or are their beliefs. How did I get to believe this? And we talked about this again in a previous webinar about conditioning. Nobody, think about conditioning as a perfect example is racism. Nobody's born racist. No one else is born hating themselves, which is one of the main things that causes depression in our society. People hating themselves. So one of the first tools, and somebody's asking a question, so let me pause here because I definitely want this to be interactive. Absolutely. Christy's asking, and I'm using first names only because, obviously last names aren't going to be used. Can depression come from trauma, for example? And then she gives an example. Absolutely. Absolutely. If you had any kind of traumatic brain injury, that will definitely affect the way your neurons function, the way your brain functions. Trauma is one of the leading causes of depression and anxiety because most people have had some form of trauma that they're not dealing with. And great, we have a lot more people tonight, which is wonderful. So if you're just joining us, we're talking about the ways we can manage depression and anxiety without medication, and please ask questions. Please do not hesitate to ask questions. So Christy's asking, can trauma affect depression and anxiety? Christy, absolutely. Trauma is one of the main ways people are affected by, one of the main things that causes depression and anxiety. And my next webinar is going to be on post-traumatic stress and how that affects depression and anxiety. But for tonight, we're focusing on depression. So yes, Christy, if someone has a TBI, for those who don't know, is a traumatic brain injury. You fall out of a tree, you get hit in the head, something happens and it causes your brain to function in a different way. Now, Tracy brings up a really good point and I'll segue into this. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but there's this thing called neuroplasticity. That's a complicated word, it sounds all fancy, but basically what neuroplasticity is the idea that our brain, the way our brain functions is like plastic. It molds itself according to our thoughts and emotions and our environment. There's a new theory out there, and you can look all this up, neuroplasticity. There's a theory that goes with neuroplasticity called epigenetics. Epigenetics is the idea that we're all born into the world with a certain predisposition to either alcoholism, depression, happiness, whatever it may be. But what happens is, epi meaning above genetics, what happens is our genes get switched into a certain way and we start feeling and thinking a certain way based on our environment. So if my father, grandfather, whatever, had a predisposition to alcoholism, but nobody drinks in my family and it's not a big deal, odds are I'm not going to have an issue with alcohol because that's how epigenetics works. The main thing I want you guys to think about is do not tell yourself I'm wired this way, okay? Please do not tell yourself I'm wired this way. Every time you tell yourself you're wired this way, guess what you're doing? Right, you're wiring yourself that way. And guess what your brain is responding to? Those types of self-statements, which leads me to the next point, self-talk. What am I telling myself? How am I relating to myself? How am I feeling about myself? One of the main things that perpetuates anxiety and depression is negative self-talk. What am I saying? How am I relating to myself? Am I telling myself a series of negative self-statements? Oh, I can never do webinars. I can never get another job. I can never find the love of my life. I can never find anybody to love me. That is one of the main causes of depression, is what we're telling ourselves about how we think and feel, okay? So we got self-talk. Now, many of you have probably heard of this concept called mindfulness. What is mindfulness? Mindfulness is the idea that if I'm aware of what I'm thinking and feeling, that affects how I think and feel. Think about it again, using racism as an example of how we're all conditioned. Let's say I was raised to hate all white people, black people, whatever it may be, green people for that matter. Let's say I was raised to hate all green people. If I'm mindful of when I'm hating a green person and I'm motivated not to do that anymore, guess what's going to happen down the line? Those beliefs are going to start dissipating. But these are the things working with a psychologist or a counselor can help bring out. How did I get conditioned? How did I learn to hate myself? How did I learn that I cannot get what I want out of this world? And that's depression and anxiety feed off of what you're telling yourself about it. So one of the things, I have a question coming in. Thank you for everyone who's engaging in this. This is great. This is exactly what we want to do. The question is, can changing thoughts about our lives really help? Excellent question. Excellent question. Come on, guys. Ask some more questions here. This is what we need. Can changing thoughts about our lives really help? Well, let's talk about that, since that's the question on the floor. Let's talk about that for a second. Let's read that again. Can changing thoughts about our lives really help? What do you guys think? Let's say, for example, I believe that my life sucks. I believe that I'm never gonna find happiness. Here's another one. Ready for this one? I hear this a lot. I'm never gonna feel better. I'm gonna be plagued with depression the rest of my life. I'm never gonna be able to feel confident in front of people. My anxiety is never going to get better. Listen to what I'm telling myself. This is what I'm telling myself. And then we're wondering why we continue to feel better. So the question is, can changing thoughts about our lives really help? Abso-blanking-lutely. Absolutely. Not only can changing our thoughts about our lives really help, the thoughts and beliefs we have about our life either help us or hurt us. You know, there's a famous quote that I use in a lot of when I'm trying to chip away at people's conditioning. I'll tell you who it was in a second, but somebody once said, those who believe they can and those who believe they cannot, both are correct. I'll say that again. Those who believe they can and those who believe they can't, both are correct. Guess who said that? Henry Ford. Henry Ford, the owner of the most incredible, yes, and says yes, absolutely. The founder of one of the biggest auto companies in our country. Those who believe they can and those who believe they can't. But see, most people aren't aware of how their beliefs are affecting how they feel. You know, another thing I hear that people that are told by the person who prescribed their medication, they're told all the time, you're going to be on this the rest of your life. Now think about that for a second, guys. Think about going into a doctor with a broken arm or a broken leg and the doctor telling you, you know what? You're going to need this cast the rest of your life. You're going to need these crutches the rest of your life. What's going to happen to your arm or leg? It's going to weaken. And that's a belief that people are told over and over. And let me just segue real quick into something here. I posted something on my Facebook page the other day about people who are the doctors who are prescribing this medication. Please, the next time you're prescribed a medication by your family physician, your pediatrician, please ask them what their mental health training is to prescribe this medication. What training they have in mental health to prescribe medication that is for people with quote unquote mental illness. What experience do they have in this? And yes, I will say it. And if I catch some flack for it, I catch some flack. Primary care physicians, doctors should not be prescribing mental health medications. They shouldn't be, because they don't have the training to deal with the psychological aspects of a person's mental illness, whatever they're struggling with mentally. But we don't question that. We don't ask ourselves, we don't ask the doctor, hey doc, okay, you're prescribing me Xanax, which by the way is a very addictive anti-anxiety medication. It's a very addictive anti-anxiety medication. Can I ask you something? Can I see the studies that show the long-term effects of being on this medication? Can you show me what's going to happen to me after a while? Benzodiazepines. Type into Google one day benzodiazepine and read some of the side effects. Now, again, I am not saying that all medication is bad. I'm not. I'm saying the way it's prescribed, it's overly prescribed, and it's given to people with this idea that they're going to be on it the rest of your life. Okay, I have a question coming in. If you're mindful of your thoughts and you know that they are negative, how do you start to make changes? If you've thought a certain way for 40 years, where do you start to make the change? Thank you, Susan. Excellent question. I love those questions. Those are great questions. So, yes, that's the beginning. But Susan, if you've been thinking a certain way for 40 years, you got to spend some time trying to figure out why you're thinking that way, how you got to think that way. Because yes, after 40 years, if you've been thinking a certain way, it's absolutely going to take some work to make some changes, but it ain't impossible. I have clients, I work with clients from 10, some little as 4, 5, 6, up until their 80s and 90s. And yes, I do firmly believe that everyone can affect how they think and feel. But people don't believe that. Maybe Susan's believing, oh, come on, I've been thinking this way for 40 years. I can't change the way I think and feel. Come on, man, I've been thinking negatively. You know, keep your psychobabble to yourself. This is who I am. Well, without getting coarse, Susan, if you're believing that, I will call BS, because the only reason you think you may not be able to make a change because you've been thinking that way for 40 years is because you think you can't make a change. You think you can't make a change. And one of the main things that a psychologist or anybody in this field will help you work on are your beliefs. I have to see another question coming in. Cognitive behavioral psychology works with the ABCs of thinking: activating event, belief, consequence. I get activated, I start believing something about it, and those beliefs have consequences. Take Susan's question. She gets activated. Oh man, I'm 50, 60 years old, however old I am, 45, I've been thinking this way. That activates her. What does she start believing? That's never gonna change. Never, I'm too old. Can't teach a dog new tricks. I'm not saying you're a dog, Susan, sorry about that, but you know what I mean. That this idea that I'm wired this way. Absolutely not, Susan, absolutely not. I firmly and without a shred of doubt believe everyone can affect how they think and feel, but it takes work. It takes work. It's like riding a bike. Let me ask you guys something. When you first rode a bike, those of you who learned to ride a bike, how easy was it? How easy was it? It wasn't easy at all. It took practice. And that's what this work is practice. I'm going to go into the ABCs in a minute, but this another question at a time. Christy says 1 day at a time. Absolutely. Absolutely. Those of you who know about being present in the moment know the importance of focusing on the present moment, being aware of what's happening around you. We'll talk about that in another seminar. But the main thing I want to focus on and key in on tonight, and this is great. This is our most well-attended webinar yet. Beautiful. Hats off to all of you listening to this, because I guarantee you, you could be doing something else that's not as effective as starting to think about what you're thinking. That's the key with mindfulness, okay? Mindfulness works by being aware of what we're thinking and feeling. We read it all, mindfulness, basically what mindfulness is being aware of how you think and feel. And working on your thoughts and feelings, you start becoming aware more and more of how you were conditioned to think and feel. And that's one of the things I work with people on. Training wheels in practice, exactly. But guess what, guys? We live in the quick fix country. We live in a country that we want everything right away. We don't want to work at it. We want the pill. And yes, you know what a lot of my doctor friends say? Well, Dr. Walker or Steve or whatever, I'm just giving people what they want. They want the quick fix. Be that as it may, I hear that as an argument. But in reality, Medication has ingrained itself into our culture to such a degree that we genuinely believe that medication is treating what is ailing us. Medication, guys, is treating symptoms. Symptoms. It does nothing for the causes. Nothing. These anti-anxiety, antidepressant medications, they do not treat why you're depressed. Think about it. If somebody out there is on a medication, and I'm not putting you down. I applaud the fact that you're trying to feel better, but I'm challenging you to start looking for something that doesn't involve ingesting a bunch of chemicals that are affecting your brain, infecting your neurons in a way that's causing you side effects. Guess how many side effects doing this kind of work with somebody like me has? 0. No side effects. No sexual dysfunctions. No, it's funny, I was reading the side effects of an anti-anxiety medication for a client the other day. Guess what a side effect of an anti-anxiety medication is? Anxiety. So, again, I'm not vilifying medication. All I'm saying is you have to look at the medication like you would a cast or a crutch. If you continue keeping the cast on your arm, if you continue keeping the crutch, guess what's going to happen? You would weaken your leg or weaken your arm, and that is what's happening the longer we stay on these medications. They were never intended to be long-term solutions. That's why there are no studies, or few if any studies, on what's called the longitudinal effects of these medications. So all I'm challenging people is to begin thinking about the decisions they're making. Let's see, if we are here, that means we want to change. Great first step. Absolutely, Christy. And Christy seems to be one of the few people chiming in. Thank you, Christy. But come on, let's get some more questions here. Let's get some more people interacting with what's going on in their mind. The reason psychology is 75% effective. Now, guys, think about this. They did a study. 75% of people who did 3 to 6 months worth of this, they felt better with no side effects. And guess what? I am a licensed psychologist. You think, oh my God, it's talking to a psychologist or talking to a counselor? This is who you're going to get walking in, somebody who cares about how you're thinking and feeling. Don't call it therapy. Don't call it mental illness. Call it talking things out. Okay, I got another question coming in. Okay, let's see. Absolutely. Can medication be considered like a Band-Aid? It can, but think about it for a second. If you keep the Band-Aid on after the cut is healed, what good is the Band-Aid? But see, that's the problem, is people aren't working on their cuts, their emotional wounds. People are ashamed of how their emotional wounds are affecting them. I had somebody the other day, actually today, tell me, I'm 66 years old and I'm still struggling from this. Imagine telling yourself that over and over. How much are you going to work on it if you're ashamed of what you're struggling with? How much are you going to work on how you're thinking and feeling if you're not wanting to accept the emotional wound? So one of the things that I work with clients on is thinking about how they're framing something. So what's a frame? So if you came into my office, you'd see a whole bunch of diplomas and things like that on the wall. Now imagine for a second if I had those diplomas just tacked on the wall or taped to the wall. How would they look? Not very good, right? Spent a couple $100 on some frames. Now how do they look? They look better, but that's what framing is. People don't realize that they're framing things all the time in a way that's preventing them from feeling better. They're framing things by telling themselves, oh, this is never going to help me. I'm never going to get better. I'm never going to feel any better. And those are the frames that they're putting around things in their world, and they are feeling increasingly worse and worse. So what do? I try to challenge my clients. I'm challenging you. How are you framing your pain? How are you framing the things in your life that are affecting you? We need to think about that. We need to think about how we're framing things, because how we're framing things is going to affect how we think and feel. Suppose I'm framing tonight. Oh man, I saw 8 clients today. And now I'm thinking, oh God, I gotta do a webinar tonight. Oh man, imagine if I'm framing it like that. How is this webinar going to feel to me? What kind of energy are you going to feel from me? We need to be more aware of what we're thinking and feeling. So let's recap here. Oh, I was going to explain the ABCs. Activating event, belief, consequence. We get activated, we start believing something about the activating event. and those beliefs have consequences in the form of feelings. And if you focus on your beliefs, if you focus on what you're believing about whatever is activating you in your world, you're going to start realizing that your beliefs are affecting how you think and feel. So one of the main beliefs I see of making people more depressed and anxious is perfection. The idea that they have to be perfect, that they can achieve perfection. And I guarantee you that if you believe perfection is attainable, you will struggle with depression. You will struggle with feeling not good enough. You will struggle with not liking yourself. One of the things I work with my clients on every day is disputing the validity, meaning how valid is it to expect myself to be perfect. Perfection is one of the most destructive mental states you can do, because guess what? It affects everything. It affects your relationships. It affects how you treat yourself. My wife, my husband, they do something imperfect. What do? That's unacceptable. That's not okay with me to be imperfect. So, great. I'm glad that makes sense, Pleasure. I'm glad it makes sense, because I am challenging everybody, and we're going to end here soon. I am challenging everybody watching this today to begin to dispute the validity of how they feel about themselves. Ask yourself, where did I learn that I'm no good? How did I learn I'm no good? How did that get ingrained in me? Me telling myself, I had a question at the beginning that said, if you've been thinking a certain way for 40 years, can that really change? Imagine telling yourself it can't. Then how are you going to feel? You're going to continue telling yourself that I'm never going to be able to make any changes. I'm never going to be able to make anything out of my life that is going to help me feel better. And one of the things I hear people talk all the time about is thinking positively. Oh, just think positively. Just think positively. Great. Show me how. We hear that in our culture all the time. Get over it. Let it go. Just let it go. No, I don't sing. But let it go. Imagine telling me, while having a client walk into my office that's depressed, and me saying, just let it go. Don't let it bother you. Come on. Of course not. We can't let things go because we haven't worked on them. If you don't think your past is still affecting you, then with all due respect, you're not aware of how your past is still affecting you, because you don't want to admit to yourself that it is. And guess what? Everyone's past is still affecting them. But we're not comfortable talking about that in our culture, because that means we're weak. We're imperfect, and I can only speak for men, but men are conditioned to be afraid of weakness. Men are conditioned that it's not okay to be weak. There's something wrong with being weak, and as long as that's happening, men will react out of pain instead of, oh, honey, it really hurt me when you said that. They'll get angry, and that's why they call anger a secondary emotion. The primary emotion is pain. So perfection, the need to be perfect, is another thing that's affecting the way our brain functions. And yes, why do I believe most depression and anxiety can be treated without medication or with a low dose of medication? Which, by the way, every study that studies the effectiveness of medication, every study says medication and talking things out, working on cognitive behavioral psychology, getting into a situation where you can talk about some of this pain, combining low doses of medication with this form of work gets the best results than medication alone. Look them up. Look it up. Do not take my word for it. Look it up. Medication alone only treats the symptoms. And we are continually told that depression is a biological medical condition. That is still hotly debated, okay? The people telling you that your depression is a medical condition, guess what they're trying to treat it with? Medication. If you believe it's a medical condition, medication, it is treated medication. So one of the things I do work with people on is learning how to Meditate. Have you ever thought about this? The word meditate and medicate is only different. There's only a one letter difference in that. Medicate and meditate. And yes, they're finding the effects of meditation are incredibly powerful. This is why you have people who devoted their life to learning how to meditate. And I'm going to do a webinar on effective meditation, because people think that meditation is, I have no thoughts, my mind is clear. That is not what meditation is. That's a part of meditation, but that's not all of what meditation is. I have another question coming in. The medications weaken the body physically and have patients believing that it is helping, and in reality, it's doing more harm than good. Thank you, Pleasure. I'm sorry, I missed Lucia's question. What kind of help is recommended to someone with an addiction to get through anxiety? Okay, I'm going to do Lucia's question first, and I'll come to Pleasure. And I missed Kyle's question. Wow, I'm not getting notifications. Would expectations that we have for ourselves also contribute to perfection? Absolutely. Absolutely, and I'll go down. So Kyle was first. Absolutely, Kyle. Would expectations that we have for ourselves also contribute to perfection? Absolutely. And you know, one of the ways that unrealistic expectations get ingrained in us is how we were raised, how we were conditioned. So I would ask Kyle, how was you making a mistake dealt with in your family? How were you treated when you made a mistake? What was going on around you when you did something wrong? How was that? How did that affect you? How did that affect your expectations of being perfect? You got to look at that. How was I conditioned to deal with myself when I make a mistake? Lucia's question. What kind of help is recommended to someone with an addiction to get through anxiety? So what I think you're saying is, what kind of help like this is recommended for somebody with an addiction who is maybe anxious about their addiction or anxious about being addicted? That's what I think you're saying. So what I will say is, if anyone out there is struggling with an addiction, okay, which everyone has, by the way, everyone's addicted to shopping, money, work, medication, alcohol, drugs, TV, whatever it may be. We all have addictions. Let me tell you the first way to deal with an addiction, okay, is to accept it. You have to accept that you have it. And you have to accept it in a spirit of wanting to do something about it. But people say to me all the time, well, if you accept it, it's only going to get worse. And this is another key point about acceptance. Not accepting it is going to make the problem worse. Think about the wound, okay? Think about the wound. I don't accept there's a wound. How's it going to heal? People don't want to accept how they feel. They don't want to accept that they have an addiction because it's a sign of weakness. I don't want to accept it. I can't accept that. So they don't work on it. Guys, and I applaud everyone that's come tonight, okay? Do not buy into this, I'm not going to curse, this BS mental health stigma, okay? This is one of the most destructive aspects of our society. Think of one aspect of our society that isn't controlled by the way we think and feel. One aspect of your day today that isn't controlled by how you think and feel. Mental health is, I say, as or more important than working on your physical health. Because if your mental health is bad, meaning if you hate yourself, if you're down, if you think you're not going to work on your physical health. And I work with a lot of clients who are religious, and I have nothing against religion, nothing at all. But they also always say, oh, I got to put God first. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with putting God first, but in my world, what's your relationship with God going to be like if you hate yourself? Okay? There's nothing wrong with putting you first, working on your mind, your psychology, how you're thinking and feeling. There's nothing wrong with that. We should all be doing that. And so the last question is, the medications weaken your body and have patients believing that it's helping. In reality, it's doing more harm than good. You know, I hope I answered your question, Lucia, about addiction and getting through anxiety. So basically, just to recap that again, someone with an addiction gets anxious that they have the addiction. Oh my God, what's going to happen if I have this addiction? If someone finds out, oh my God. Well, that anxiety is making your addiction worse, because then you're in a cycle. You're in a loop. I'm anxious about having my addiction. Now I'm feeling worse, so I need more of the addiction, more of what I'm doing to compensate for the anxiety. Now the anxiety is getting worse. Now I have to do more again to compensate for the addiction. Okay? And that's the way the cycle works with addiction. We don't know which came first, the chemical imbalance or the feeling. Nobody knows that. Anybody who tells you that, I don't want to say they're lying, but nobody knows what came first. The quote unquote chemical imbalance, which by the way, it's difficult to measure a chemical imbalance in a synaptic cleft, the thinness of a less than a sheet of paper, okay? Remember the neuron? So question which came first, the chicken or the egg when it comes to chemical imbalance or feeling, because I maintain that feeling came first, okay? So Pleasure's asking, the medications weaken the body and do in reality do more harm than good. Well, you know, Pleasure, I'm not going to stigmatize all medication because medication has its place. But yes, prolonged use of medication, especially benzodiazepines, which Xanax is and all these other ones, do weaken your body's central nervous system. That's what they work on. They work on the central nervous system of our body. And yes, in time, they will have a corresponding negative effect. Okay, so what I'm challenging you guys to question is the belief system. And the next time you see an anti-anxiety medication or an antidepressant commercial, listen to it. Listen to when they say it is thought that blank medication works this way. It is believed. And ask yourself, why are they presenting it that way? Why aren't they saying, no, it is, this is the way it is, and this is the proof? Because why they say it that way is because it's a theory. In fact, guys, to be honest with you, the chemical imbalance is also a theory. It's a theory. You know what another theory is? Our environment, our environmental imbalances affect our chemical imbalance. So, great. Pleasure's asking, I have a client that is afraid to speak in front of a classroom. What suggestions can I give her to overcome anxiety? Okay, Pleasure, the number one advice I'll tell you to tell her it's okay to be anxious. Tell her to stop beating herself up for being anxious. Say it's okay. It's okay that I have anxiety. It's okay that I feel anxious. It's okay. It's okay, but let me work on it. Let me work on it. That's called active acceptance. You actively accept it and you work on it. People beat themselves. Oh, it's so pathetic. I shouldn't be anxious about speaking in front of a classroom. I shouldn't be afraid to ask that girl out, or I shouldn't be afraid to go out with this guy, or I shouldn't be afraid. And they beat themselves up, and that causes more and more anxiety, which is another key point. And I know, we're going, I don't want to, talk too long here, but we have a feeling. Okay, so imagine that there's a circle here, okay? And at the top of this circle is a feeling. Let's say it's a negative feeling, okay? As that negative feeling starts hitting us more and more, we start having negative self-talk. And that negative self-talk then reinforces that feeling. And that feeling gets more intense, and that self-talk then comes back onto you. And that's how these negative feelings get reinforced. Pleasure's friend, I'll bet you any money, Pleasure, and send me an email after you, or if you want, or send me a message on Facebook or whatever. But I'll bet you any money, if you asked your friend or your client who's afraid to talk in front of a classroom, ask them how they're treating themselves, how they're talking to themselves, and you'll find out that they're negatively talking to themselves about being anxious. Okay, so let's talk real quick about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. The topic is the way psychology is made fun of. We hear a lot of people in the self-help community. I had a client the other day tell me, this person giving a seminar or whatever said that, oh, anybody can do psychology. Anybody can talk things out. Everybody. And you know what? I'll get to Chrissy's question in a second. Chrissy's asking, are depression and anxiety based out of fear somehow? Absolutely. Absolutely. Depression and anxiety are based out of fear. But let me just make this quick point. I know in the past, many people have thought that going to speak to someone like me or talking to a counselor is they just sit there and, how does that make you feel? Mm-hmm. So you're saying that you're unhappy? Mm-hmm. And they just sit there. Well, that isn't what psychology is, guys. I'm sorry. Psychology, the new breed of psychologist is somebody who is adopting more of a coaching model, gives a client time to talk and get things out of them and work, but also actively helps them to dispute the belief system that is ingrained in them, that is causing them to feel a certain way. So getting back to Pleasure's question, I'm sorry. I think her client has some wounds about anxiety, has some fears of being judged, and those are affecting her ability to feel confident in the moment. So Pleasure, I would recommend to your client, find somebody that you can talk some of that stuff out with, because maybe there's something going on inside of her that needs to be addressed. And yes, it upsets me greatly to see people who aren't trained in this type of work using psychological techniques without the proper training. You know, people ask me all the time, well, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist? Well, get this. A psychiatrist prescribes medication. A psychologist works with the psychology of the person to help them do it without medication. Guess what? Most psychiatrists have no training in therapy. In fact, many of their insurance policies won't cover them for therapy because they don't have the training. So if you're working with a psychiatrist and this person's doing therapy with you, they're actually working out of their scope of training. They don't have, psychologists have years and years of training to do therapy, okay? And I'm not saying psychiatrists are ineffective. I'm saying that they are trained to prescribe medication. If you've been working with a psychiatrist and not getting any results, there's probably a reason for that. The reason is they're not trained to do therapy. And with all due respect to people in the self-help community, you're actually doing more harm than good by giving people ideas, psychological tools, without giving them the techniques to use them in an effective way. So I'm not saying the only people on the planet that can help people are psychologists, but if you're using psychological tools to try to help people without the proper training, it's like me saying, well, you know, I know how to operate on somebody who has a heart condition because I had a heart condition. Or I know now how to do surgery on knees because I hurt my knee. No, we don't. You know, this is why, again, we need to get the proper help. But if you want to try to do this by yourself and you don't want to talk things out, you're only going to achieve a certain level of relief. And I'm not saying you can't achieve a certain level of relief, but the talking things out, the getting the effective feedback from somebody, the helping somebody process it is how people make these changes, okay? So the last Christy's question, are depression and anxiety based out of fear and somehow? Absolutely, Christy. Depression and anxiety is absolutely based in fear. Remember, we talked about fear in one of the previous webinars. Fear, false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. What's false evidence about depression? Oh man, I'm never gonna feel better. I'm never gonna get out of this. I'm never going to be able to talk in front of that classroom. And this is what breeds more and more anxiety. Depression and anxiety, the more we stay in those negative affective states, we are actually physically affecting our brain. If you want to do some research, type in this name into Google, Cozzalino, I think it's Cozzalino. He studied the effects of therapy on the brain. Guess what he found? This type of work physically, it changes the way the brain works. That's called brain plasticity. It's the idea that our brains work as plastic. They mold themselves. So releasing a lot of this pent-up negativity is the way we make changes, okay? So Pleasure saying, okay, we'll do, thanks. Okay, we'll do. This webinar is great, great. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Please pass this on. I'm doing these every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. They're free. I'm doing this Not because I'm so, well, I mean, I guess I do care about people, but I want to sound like I'm, you know, whatever. But I do care. I see so many people, 37,000 people kill themselves, according to the World Health Organization a few years ago. 37,000 people kill themselves. Why? Because they're not working on how they're thinking and feeling. They're thinking a book or a seminar by somebody who just talks and talks and talks. And I know I'm talking a lot, but is going to cure them. It's not. You got to talk this stuff out, guys. You got to work on how you're thinking and feeling. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the way we relate to ourselves and how all this stuff affects how we're thinking and feeling. I'm just going over my notes to see if I covered everything. So it's about 55 minutes. Thank you for coming. Please share this if you see it posted. If I send you an email, please send this around. I'm trying to do what I can to help people not suffer. Please work on your beliefs. Work on how your conditioning is affecting how you think and feel. Question that thinking and feeling. And that's right. I was going to talk real quick about positive thinking. It's not okay just to think positively. You've got to dispute the belief system, the validity of the negative thinking. But again, we live in a culture that stigmatizes negativity. And I'm going to do a webinar on why negativity is important, why the negative aspects of who we are is important to us. Okay? So, if there are no other questions, thank you for coming. I appreciate those of you who stuck around for the whole thing. Again, please be aware of how you're thinking and feeling. Please be aware of how that's affecting how you feel. Question that conditioning. Look at the beliefs. Work on your relationship with yourself. Intrapersonal psychology. Type in intrapersonalpsychology.com. You'll come to my website. Shoot me a question. Okay? All right, guys. Thanks for coming. I appreciate all the questions, and I'll see you next Wednesday at 8 o'clock. I'll post what it's going to be about, but hope it helped. Think about it, and remember, talking things out is the way to feel better. Okay? Take care. Have a great night. We'll see you.